I walk into the house and stick my hand out to come in for the first time and think, phew, got over that.
Princess Charlotte has reportedly stumbled upon a secret tape capturing the late Princess Diana's emotional and fiery confrontation with Camilla Parker Bowles, one that could shake the royal family to its core. Sources say the young princess discovered the recording while exploring an old trunk tucked away in a dusty storage room, a place untouched for decades. What she found was nothing short of explosive. What exactly was said? Why was this tape hidden for so long? Join us as we uncover the jaw-dropping truth hidden within the secret audio tape. Body. Diana Secret Tapes. For years, Diana suffered in silence, plagued by feelings of self-hatred and convinced she was never good enough. Behind the palace walls, she was isolated, heartbroken, and emotionally crushed. This is the story the royal family hoped would never come to light. A story so powerful, so raw, that Diana had to secretly record it on tape.
According to press reports, it was suggested that it was around this time things became so difficult that
In those private moments, she poured out her heartbreak, confessing that her husband made her feel utterly worthless. She longed for those tapes to change her future. Instead, they changed history. Now, many years after her untimely death, her unfiltered voice will finally be heard as Princess Charlotte stumbled on her secret audio tape. What unfolds is a deeply personal account, intimate, emotional, and entirely unrehearsed. "I can't marry him. I can't do this," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and honesty. Her words swing between moments of joy and waves of anguish. "I was just so desperate," she confesses. "I knew what was wrong with me." On these tapes, Diana opens up like never before, revealing her innermost thoughts without the filter of royal expectations. She speaks of harming herself, of running a razor blade across her skin, of a cry for help that went unanswered. At one point, she remembers throwing herself down the stairs while pregnant, trying to make someone, anyone, see her pain. Yet alongside the darkness, there is light. Rare, never-before-seen video clips show a playful, more relaxed side of Diana, far from the royal spotlight. There are also exclusive interviews with close friends, some speaking publicly for the first time. Together, they paint a portrait of a woman who was brave, flawed, loving, and deeply human. That evening, NBC presented a groundbreaking special.
NBC has acquired the tapes, which until now have only been heard by a handful of people.
Princess Diana, The Secret Tapes. Hosted by Jane Pauley, the program invites viewers to witness the most personal side of the late Princess of Wales. Although she lived her life under relentless media scrutiny, the truth of Diana's story remained hidden for many years. The public devoured every detail, every dress, every hairstyle, every carefully staged photo, but knew so little of the real woman behind the headlines. It was only through 6 deeply personal audio tapes that Diana finally told her own story. These recordings are the closest we may ever come to her autobiography. In them, she takes us from a lonely, privileged childhood to a disastrous royal marriage, and ultimately to the hard-won freedom she carved for herself. Until now, only a few people had ever heard these tapes. But tonight, for the first time, the world can hear Diana in her own words, in her own voice. But why would a woman so tightly guarded in public reveal such deeply private truths in secret recordings? Let's find out. Reason behind the recording. To understand why Princess Diana did an audio recording, one must return to the beginning, back to the fairy tale the world thought was real. At the time, everyone believed Prince Charles and Lady Diana were preparing for
The crowd saw that, like most brides, Lady Diana has lost weight as the day approaches.
a joyful, lifelong union. In truth, her world was crumbling. Journalist Andrew Morton, who has covered the royal family since the early 1980s, had met Diana several times. Yet even he found her inaccessible. The idea of interviewing her formally was unthinkable, he said. It was a fantasy, The Queen herself had ruled for 50 years without giving a single personal interview. The royal family's public appearances were highly controlled, brief, and staged, little more than photo opportunities. Even something as trivial as a new haircut or a dress designer's name was considered a major scoop. Reporters were kept at a distance. "May we know the name of the dog, Your Majesty?" one asked timidly during a royal outing. In truth, no one, not even the journalists who followed Diana daily, knew what she was truly experiencing behind the palace gates. At that point in her life, Princess Diana was emotionally exhausted, completely worn down by the reality of her troubled marriage. Her husband, Prince Charles, was deeply involved with another woman, Camilla Parker Bowles, who, at that time, was still married to someone else. The situation was quietly scandalous, but the public had no idea. Only a small circle of Diana's closest friends knew how much she was suffering. One of those trusted confidants was Dr. James Colthurst, a wealthy aristocrat Diana had met during a skiing trip when she was just 17 years old. He remained one of her few loyal allies during her darkest days. Speaking openly for the first time about Diana's secret anguish, Colthurst revealed that she had grown tired of pretending. The pressure of keeping up the royal facade was suffocating. She was desperate to speak out about the misery and betrayal she faced in her marriage. It was like a volcano building up inside her. She wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, but telling the world came with terrifying risks. A public confession, especially from a member of the royal family, could cause a media storm. The consequences could be disastrous. Buckingham Palace might declare her unstable. The press, which once adored her,
The police estimated there were 80,000 people here, but wise old locals reckon there were nearer 100,000.
could easily turn against her. Worst of all, Diana feared that the monarchy, which still held legal power over her sons, could try to take her children away by labeling her mentally unfit. Dr. Colthurst, concerned for her safety, urged her not to speak out rashly. He suggested a different approach, to tell her side of the story through a book. That way she could control the narrative, protect herself from media backlash, and perhaps even win the public's sympathy. Diana was going to speak out eventually. Of that, Colthurst was sure. Colthurst didn't know many journalists, but there was one he trusted, Andrew Morton. At the time, Morton had already been writing an unofficial biography of Diana. Colthurst saw an opportunity and arranged a meeting with him, offering the chance to write an authorized version, with Diana's own words at the heart of it. When Morton shared the news with publisher Michael O'Mara, the reaction was disbelief. O'Mara had previously published beautiful picture books that portrayed the royal family as a perfect fairy tale. He was skeptical. He opened those glossy books showing photos of Diana beaming alongside her husband and children, hand in hand, smiling for the cameras. "Look at her," he said. "She seems so happy." And Colthurst answered, "That's exactly the point. She has to pretend. It's all fake." From that moment on, a secret alliance was formed. Diana, the publisher, the writer, and her friend. Together, they began crafting a plan that would change history. Morton would interview Diana's closest friends to help gather information. But the most revealing parts, the raw, emotional truths, would come straight from Diana herself. The problem was that she was constantly surrounded by photographers and royal watchers. Any visit from a journalist would arouse suspicion, so they came up with a clever solution. Morton would write the questions in advance, and Colthurst, who regularly visited Diana at Kensington Palace, would ask them. He would use a small tape recorder to secretly capture her answers. No one would suspect a thing. After all, Colthurst was just a trusted friend, not a reporter. It seemed like a simple enough plan, but as they moved forward, anxiety and fear began to grow. They held secret meetings far from London, used scrambler phones to avoid being overheard, and even experienced an office break-in, possibly an attempt to sabotage the book. Despite all their caution, none of them could have predicted what was coming. What impact would this tape have on the monarchy? Will it be nothing short of explosive? Let's take a closer look. Echoes of a Princess. In May 1991, A quiet yet historic moment began to unfold, one that would eventually shake the foundations of the British monarchy. James Colthurst, a close friend of Princess Diana, rode his bicycle through the streets of London toward Kensington Palace. Resting in the basket was a small, seemingly ordinary tape recorder, but what it captured would become nothing short of revolutionary. Colthurst was familiar to the palace staff, so the guards let him through without hesitation. He made his way to Diana's private apartment, where she opened the door herself. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, ready for what would be a deeply personal and emotional task. When she saw the small recorder in his hands, she laughed lightly, but there was a sense of purpose in the air. Diana clipped the microphone onto her shirt without hesitation. At precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, Colthurst pressed the red record button for the very first time. He asked gently if there was anything she preferred not to talk about. No, it's okay," she said, and then, without another prompt, her story began to flow. What followed was an outpouring of emotion, memory, and truth. Diana spoke quickly, hardly pausing for breath, as if she had been holding these words in for years. In many ways, it was exactly that. James Colthurst would later describe it as though a prisoner, locked in a mental and emotional cell for over a decade, had finally found a way to speak, and perhaps even to smuggle her voice to the outside world. This first recording session was only the beginning. Over time, there would be 6 sessions in total. Colthurst brought along a list of questions, but it wasn't long before Diana needed no guidance. She simply began with her childhood and let the memories unfold. One photo from that period shows her mid-session, seated across from Colthurst, telling her story with a mix of pain and clarity. Lady Diana Frances Spencer was born in the year 1961 into one of Britain's oldest noble families. Her childhood home, Althorp, was a grand estate, but behind the beautiful facade, her early years were marked by sadness and instability. When Diana was just 6 years old, her mother left the family for another man. The divorce that followed was brutal. She remembered, with haunting clarity, seeing her father slap her mother across the face. Diana had been hiding behind a door, too afraid to move. Her mother, she recalled, cried often, cried a lot. Diana's school years provided a form of distraction. She wasn't particularly drawn to academics, but threw herself into athletics. She did enjoy a few subjects. History, especially the period of the Stuart monarchs, captured her imagination. Still, she admitted she never expected to appear in history books herself. When asked if she had been popular as a student, Diana dismissed the idea. No, she said.
No, I think we had a great deal of interest. We both liked people, both liked country life.
Probably because I didn't think I knew the answers. She wasn't the type to shout out in class, though her lively personality still made her noticeable. In matters of love, Diana was unusually reserved for her age. While her schoolmates had boyfriends, she chose to wait. Romance novels filled her time, and she believed, perhaps instinctively, that she needed to keep herself tidy, as she put it, for the man she would one day marry. That man came into her life in November of 1977.
We struggled a bit with it. It was very difficult. And then my husband decided that we'd do separate engagements.
Diana was only 16 years old when a very important visitor arrived at Althorp. Her older sister, Sarah, had brought a guest home, Prince Charles. At the time, he was in his late 20s and one of the most sought-after bachelors in the world. As heir to the throne, he carried with him all the weight and glamour of future kingship. His public image was that of an adventurous man, often seen in military uniforms, engaging in risky, heroic acts. But to young Diana, the prince seemed surprisingly dull. Her first impression was far from flattering. What a sad man, she thought. He had arrived with his Labrador, and her sister Sarah, giddy and infatuated, was showering him with attention. Diana thought it looked a bit ridiculous. At the time, Diana didn't see herself as elegant or poised. She described herself as overweight, plain, and not particularly stylish, but she had energy and made a lot of noise, and oddly enough, Prince Charles seemed to enjoy that. In the end, neither Diana nor her sister would hold the prince's attention for long. But the seeds of something much larger had already been planted. What began as a quiet recording inside Kensington Palace would later become a voice heard around the world. How did Prince Charles and Diana's romance evolve? Let's find out. The last night of freedom. For a long time, Prince Charles was known mainly as the son of a charming and carefree aristocrat, often seen traveling around the world, enjoying life without any sign of wanting to settle down. Meanwhile, Diana was beginning a very different chapter. She had recently moved to London and taken up residence in a stylish apartment in Kensington, which she shared with a few close girlfriends. She had also started working as a kindergarten teacher, one of the most joyful and carefree periods of her life. But that simple, joyful life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Not long after she turned 18, Diana encountered Prince Charles again at a friend's house. This time, the circumstances were very different. Charles was now 30 years old and feeling enormous pressure from both his family and the public to find a suitable wife. Diana, with her noble background and quiet grace, seemed to meet every requirement. She came from the right social class, had the proper lineage, and was untainted by scandal. Unlike the glamorous, confident women Charles had dated in the past, Diana was young, shy, and innocent. But she was also sweet, humorous, and deeply flattering. There was a fresh charm about her that made her stand out, and Charles began to take a real interest in her. They soon began dating, and after just 2 months, he invited her to join him at the Braemar Games in Scotland, a traditional royal event. It would be Diana's very first time participating in royal life, and she was to stay at Balmoral Castle, one of the Queen's official residences. Diana was quietly terrified. She later recalled how she didn't stay very long but felt intense pressure to make a good impression. That visit marked a turning point, not just in her relationship with Charles, but in her entire life. It was during this trip that the paparazzi first noticed her. From that moment on, her world would never be the same. The press began following her relentlessly, watching her every move. Photographers even rented a flat across the street from hers, spying on her through binoculars and snapping photos through her bedroom window. Overwhelmed and heartbroken, Diana would often break down in tears, alone inside her apartment. She felt trapped and helpless, yet the press refused to leave her in peace. The questions became more personal, the attention more intense. "Is there a wedding coming soon?" reporters would shout. The public sensed that Diana was the one, even though no official announcement had been made. Prince Charles himself dropped hints, suggesting they wouldn't have to wait long. Then, on Friday, February 6, 1981, 7 months after they began dating, Prince Charles invited Diana to Windsor Castle. He had something important to ask. Nervous and uncertain, Charles finally proposed. Diana laughed at first, unsure if he was joking, but he was completely serious. "You do realize," he told her, "that one day you'll be queen." At that moment, Diana felt an eerie sensation deep inside, a quiet voice telling her she would never be queen, but her path would be incredibly difficult. Despite her doubts, she accepted. The night before the engagement was officially announced, Diana packed her bags and said a final goodbye to her old life. She and her roommates celebrated with champagne, but beneath the joy was a growing sense of finality. She moved out of her Kensington apartment and into the care of the royal family, where her life would be governed by strict rules and constant scrutiny. A police officer assigned to her said with a grave tone, "This is your last night of freedom. The rest of your life begins tomorrow." Diana described the moment as if a sword had pierced her heart, and yet she put on a brave face. On the morning of Tuesday, the 24th of February in the year 1981, Diana stood beside Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace, smiling for the cameras as they officially announced their engagement. When asked how they felt, Charles simply said he was delighted and happy, and added, "I'm amazed she's brave enough to take me on."
Yes, certainly can. It was 1977 that Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
When a reporter asked if they were in love,
and they laugh about very childlike things, but they do because they haven't been out there like all of us. So Charles has been very protected.
Charles replied with a vague and unsettling remark, "Whatever in love means." That comment, awkward and ambiguous, left many people bewildered, including Diana herself. She had just returned from a 3-week trip to Australia, during which she and Charles hadn't spoken at all. It had been a lonely, painful time for her. The press asked if they had even tried to speak, given how far apart they were. Diana answered that they had tried to make contact, but the pressure from reporters and the physical distance had made it nearly impossible. She added that although the press didn't manage to find her in Australia, the trip had still been, in her own words, a complete disaster. From that point onward, Diana's journey as a royal had truly begun. However, was her path far more complicated and filled with sorrow than she had ever anticipated? Let's take a look. Diana's emotional struggle. Princess Diana feared that Prince Charles was emotionally involved with another woman, Camilla Parker Bowles, a past lover of his who was now married to one of his close friends. Despite Camilla's marriage, Diana noticed signs that something deeper still existed between them. She once overheard Charles talking to Camilla on the phone while he was in the bath. He had been kneeling with the receiver in his hand and said, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." Diana later told him that she had been listening at the door. When reporters saw Diana crying as Charles left for an official engagement, they assumed she was simply sad to see him go. But according to secret recordings she made, her tears had a different cause. Something painful had just happened. Diana had been sitting with Charles in his study when the phone rang. She decided to be polite and stay in the room. But what she heard during the call devastated her. It shattered her emotionally. Over time, Diana's emotional suffering began to show in her body. In just 5 months, she lost 5.5 inches from her waist. This wasn't just an attempt to look thin in her wedding dress. It was the start of bulimia, a serious eating disorder. It began shortly after Charles proposed. One day he touched her waist and made a remark, "A bit chubby here, aren't we?" That one comment deeply affected her. She later described how thrilled she felt the first time she made herself sick, thinking it was a way to release tension. Unfortunately, the disorder would torment her for years. She even had an episode of bulimia the night before her wedding, after discovering a bracelet Charles had bought for Camilla. All of London was preparing for the big royal wedding. Streets were decorated with bunting, and nearly every shop window displayed photos of the soon-to-be married couple. People were already camping out for a good view of the procession. But inside Diana's private world, she was spiraling. That night, she ate everything she could find and then made herself sick. It was a clear sign of the emotional turmoil she was hiding. Any other woman in her situation might have canceled the wedding, but Diana felt trapped. And so, on the morning of July 29, 1981, the world watched as trumpets rang out and over 700 million people tuned in. Diana stepped out of her glass carriage, feeling not like a bride, but like someone walking toward her own doom. She described feeling helpless and terrified, as if she were being led to the slaughter. She couldn't even process her emotions amidst the overwhelming ceremony and grandeur. The whole event seemed absurd to her, an enormous spectacle she felt completely out of place in. After all, she had once been just a kindergarten teacher. The entire wedding, in her words, felt ridiculous. Inside St. Paul's Cathedral, there were 2,500 guests. As Diana walked up the aisle, she searched for one particular face. She spotted Camilla, wearing a pale gray outfit and a matching pillbox hat. The image seared itself into Diana's memory. Even now she recalled it vividly, thinking to herself, "There it is. That's it. I hope it's over now." Still hoping for a fairy tale ending, Diana tried to focus on what she hoped would go right. So, what are your thoughts on Princess Diana's secret audio tape discovered by Princess Charlotte? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.